Maybe MJ was right. Why would the city need me when it has you?
How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Feels great.
Another year, another Sony cinematic slop game that everyone's gonna pretend is a masterpiece. At the time of recording this has a 91 on Metacritic. Now, if you still trust Metacritic scores, you're probably an idiot, but still, the point stands that this game is obviously getting the Sony hand job from all the critics for pushing for social change. Even if you do agree with the politics, it is far too similar to the last game gameplay-wise. It really makes very few, if any, improvements. It has some of the worst pacing I've ever seen in a video game, despite having significantly fewer cutscenes than God of War Ragnarok. It's actually worse because it interrupts the gameplay every 10 minutes, and even when you are playing it, you're either solving a brain-dead puzzle, or playing some other mini-game, or you get a walking simulator mission, or you're playing as a spider bot. Basically anything except swinging through the city and fighting bad guys. So it makes absolutely no sense how this game is up there with all the greatest games ever made. Now, reviewing this game is going to be difficult because I am so utterly frustrated and tired with all of the political virtue signaling that is in modern video games. And this is one of the worst cases I've ever seen, by the way. If you tuned into the streams, you know exactly why already. So it's going to be hard to actually try to give this a fair review because this game really pissed me off. I mean, I don't think I've been this mad at a video game, well, at least since Starfield, which really released not that long ago, but you might have thought that I was reaching on some of my points with God of War Ragnarok's story, and I'll admit I was barely paying attention half the time because that game was so unbelievably boring. But Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 is not just almost as equally boring as God of War, but also twice as woke, undeniably so. It'll be interesting to see the usual suspects try to pretend that this isn't clear political propaganda being shoved down our throat. Now, because this review is going to come out over a week after the game's release, anybody who decided they wanted to purchase the game has already made that choice, so at this point, I'm just giving my thoughts, because clearly, a lot of you want to hear my thoughts on this game. And man, I'm finding it difficult to really drudge up the anger that is required for a game like this. I'm honestly more depressed than anything. I've said this a few times in the past, but Insomniac used to be one of my favorite video game developers. They've quite literally made my favorite game of all time, Spyro the Dragon. But it wasn't just Spyro. Those of you who've been on this channel for a while know that I really enjoy the Ratchet & Clank games, which was also made by Insomniac. The first 4 games in that series all have their place amongst my favorite games of all time. They're really fun, actually kind of funny games too. The humor is aged surprisingly well, and they're just a good time all around. But fast forward 20 years and Insomniac is nothing like the company that made those games. It's happened to pretty much every video game studio that was big in the late 90s and early 2000s. None of them have maintained the same level of quality, which I guess shouldn't be surprising. But Insomniac at least used to understand what made a game fun. This game is not fun 80% of the time. So fuck it, let's just talk about the gameplay. Now, unlike most of my other videos, I'm actually not going to talk about gameplay all that much because it's very similar to the last game. Chances are, if you're interested in this, you've already played the game that released back in 2018, and even a few of you played that Miles Morales game, though not nearly as many, judging by sales numbers. So you've basically already played this already. So just sticking to the gameplay and not talking about the story or anything, I think it's perfectly competent. But as I've said multiple times, especially on the streams, I have never been a huge fan of Arkham-style combat. I do like those games, and I also like Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, but I'm not particularly good at that combat system. I just have kind of slow reflexes in general, and unfortunately I played about half of this game while I was tired, so this gameplay isn't particularly great. So I'm going to try to not hold that against the game, though I did have a lot of frustration with some of the boss fights specifically. So what's different this time around? Well, now we have a block/parry button, which really is probably the greatest source of my complaints with this game, because the muscle memory is so beaten into me from playing all these Arkham-style games to press one button to dodge attacks. But most of the time it wasn't a problem, as long as it was an enemy that you're specifically supposed to parry, like the big heavy guys. That's pretty intuitive. Really, what I had a problem with the parry system was with the bosses, because the style boss fight has been shifted to be something much more similar to a Souls-style boss, where you're trying to memorize the boss's patterns and dodge or parry accordingly. Now, where I fucked up in particular is that I didn't pick up on the fact that a lot of these bosses are easier to parry than they are to dodge. Because if an attack just has the white spider sense symbol, I assume I should be able to dodge it no problem. But there's a lot of ending lag on the dodge, and so it's actually faster and more reliable to parry them like you would in Sekiro or some other similar game. But I fucked up a lot on these bosses because of the parry system, and ultimately I'm just not a big fan. I'm not going to say it's bad game design, because I don't really think it is, but it personally made the combat less fun for me. And it's not really worth explaining the rest of the combat mechanics because you should already be familiar with them. It plays like an Arkham game with a heavy emphasis on air combos. In fact, air combos are just better than ground combos. But with the downside being that if there are any ranged enemies in the area, they will immediately target you as soon as you knock an enemy into the air. Now, to talk about the enemies, I was a little bit disappointed on this front. The enemy variety is somewhat lacking. It's not as bad as it seems on paper, but in practicality, you're fighting the same handful of Kraven goons about 75% of the time. And you've already fought most of these enemy types in the previous game, with the exception of the new brute enemy types now all having an undodgeable attack that you have to parry instead. There's also a robotic panther that can shoot out a wave that temporarily disables your abilities. That was a pretty good idea. I like that. But that's pretty much all I have to say about it. If you played one of these Arkham games, you've fought all of these basic enemy types before. Now, the combat is usually somewhat fun most of the time just because of how fast-paced it is. It is a little on the brainless side because of you constantly spamming one of your 4 abilities or one of your 4 gadgets, but it also lets you take out a lot of enemies fairly quickly. So while it certainly doesn't have the skill ceiling that the Arkham games have, especially since it has a little bit of a jankness factor to it, it's hard to describe, but the game doesn't always do what you want it to do. Whereas in Arkham, it pretty much works perfectly, every button press is important. This game, it's much more mashy. Again, except for the boss fights. The boss fights are a significant challenge, and if I wasn't really tired while playing this game, I might have actually enjoyed them. With one small issue, maybe not a small issue actually, I would say it's a big issue, that the bosses have way too much health, and every single boss has multiple phases. Now normally, a boss having multiple phases is kinda cool, but in this game, a lot of bosses, in fact over half of the bosses, have 3 phases, and 2 of them have 4 phases. That's too fucking much, dude. There's no reason that an Arkham-style boss needs to take 10 minutes to defeat. Especially since this is the type of game where if you sort of lose the flow and start fucking up, you can very easily die and then have to restart that phase over again. Another issue is that some of the bosses can be stun-locked with your abilities and gadgets. I'm not entirely sure if this is intentional, and it might just be given the overly inflated health bars. But normally, you're supposed to dodge or parry the 4 or 5 attack sequence, and then you get your 4 or 5 punches in. But you can then use an ability and get another 4 or 5 punches, then use another ability, though usually they'll have a combo breaker at some point and then start attacking again, which in and of itself feels very jank, because they can attack almost immediately after they do their combo breaker. In later bosses, this strategy doesn't work at all. And I don't think I need to tell you why it's a problem that it's not clear when it's the boss's turn to attack, especially when the game relies on the player's reflexes for half the challenge. Okay, that's pretty much all I got to say about gameplay. It's probably the best element in the game. I'm not going to say it's bad. It might not be my thing, but I can certainly acknowledge that it is fun enough, and it's the only reason why anybody actually enjoys this game, if we're being real. Okay, well, what about the sandbox? Again, this is much like the first game. There's a lot of repetitive activities where you're basically just making your way to some rooftop or some alley and beating up a bunch of dudes to progress some side quest. Those are completely fine because at least you're playing the game during those times. One thing I will say is I completed the Sandman questline, and the conclusion was incredibly disappointing and pointless. There was only one major side quest line I actually liked, and here I'll give you your one and only spoiler warning for this video, because I'm just going to spoil basically everything from here on out, is I like the build up to Carnage with this whole Cult of the Flame thing. Now, the thing that I absolutely despise, that you could probably guess, is that Yuri, the cop from the first game who works with Spider-Man throughout the game, has now become a vigilante akin to the Punisher. She's a mall ninja dressed in purple with a fucking chain sickle. She had a gun as a cop and is now downgraded to a fucking chain sickle and swings around kinda like Spider-Man. And it's implied that she kills people, though we never see her actually killing anybody. And there's multiple things that are cringe about this character. First of all, she acts like a try-hard edgelord. Another case of a strong female character basically just embodying toxic masculinity traits. And she talks shit to Spider-Man the whole time, despite being buddies with him in the last game. And it's implied that a normal human with no powers, no real training, at least it's not shown on screen where training is a match for Spider-Man because she has her own two-phase boss fight most of the way through the quest line. She got punched 10,000 times. She's completely fine. Are you fucking joking? Is gameplay canon? Is gameplay canon in modern games? I really have to wonder. So really, the only reason why I like this quest is the final mission where Spider-Man has to defuse a bunch of bombs and then derail this train. The train ends up nearly killing him. It crushes him up to his neck. And Cletus nearly burns him alive while also obtaining a piece of the Venom symbiote. And he literally even says the word Carnage, if it wasn't any more clear at this point. Now, before I devolve into just talking about all the various aspects that I hate about this game, I guess I'll give a very quick mention of the web swinging. Now, the swinging physics are still inferior to the original Spider-Man 2. If you saw my last video, you'll know I just played Spider-Man 2, so I can absolutely verify that the swinging was more satisfying in that game because it took more skill and had much better physics. It just had more momentum and felt faster than this, though in reality I don't think that's actually true. I believe people have done the tests before, and by default in the settings there's a swing assist feature that is maxed out that makes it pretty much impossible to fail at swinging. It will actually alter the momentum and the angle of your swing so that you don't hit the ground. Now, of course, about halfway through the game, I turned this off to see the difference, and it does feel a little bit better without the swing assist. But now with the addition of the wingsuit, it's harder to fail anyway, because as soon as you jump at the height of your swing, you can just break out the wingsuit real quick and glide, keeping most of your momentum, and then once you slow down, you start swinging again, so it's even more brainless. And Spider-Man with the wingsuit just feels wrong. And man, I'm just really sick of wingsuits in general, maybe because I've played so many modern games in the past decade, but I think the only time I legitimately enjoyed one was Just Cause 3, and even then, I enjoyed said wingsuit even more when you purchase the first DLC and it turns into an Iron Man jetpack with a machine gun and missiles. Ultimately, I just don't really like wingsuits that much anymore. It was a cool novelty in that game and in Far Cry 3 and 4, but I've already seen it way too many fucking times. It doesn't belong in a Spider-Man game. That said, I might be a little critical here, but I do think swinging around the city is still fun, just not as fun as the original Spider-Man 2. Okay, that's pretty much everything that I even vaguely liked about the game. We're only going downhill from here. I pretty much have nothing else to say positively about this game. I honestly don't even know where to begin. I guess we can stick with the sandbox for now, and we'll cover the story later. There's a lot of story-based side quests in this game that are tagged with the superhero app that this fat Asian kid named Genki made for you. I never played the Miles Morales game for obvious reasons, so I had no idea who the fuck this kid is, and I really don't care if he's been featured in the comics. He's a lame character. I don't like him. Spider-Man is a genius. He can make his own fucking gadgets, okay? Stop taking shit away from him. Oh, wait, this whole game takes shit away from him, but we'll get to that. Hold on. So through this stupid superhero app, instead of Spider-Man solving real problems like supervillains robbing banks or killing people, he decides to help randos who have some kind of trivial issue they could easily solve themselves. For example, you help some black woman find her grandpa who's gotten lost in Central Park or something, and you legitimately waste your time walking around the park, finding some random evidence, doing a fucking god-awful mini-game. And this game's full of shitty mini-games, by the way. They're just straight up padding. They add nothing. They require no brain power. Though I say that, funny enough, I did get stumped by an incredibly easy one at one point. Guys, I'm feeling dumb. My dumbness is activating. God. Retard mode engaged. I guess that's another moment for the Son of DSP compilation. But of course, at the end of this quest line, you find the grandpa, he talks about his wife, and that's it. That's the whole point of the quest, is to listen to some old man reminisce about his wife when he was younger. But it gets much worse than that. There's another quest where you help some old black guy free his pigeons because he's about to die, and so they need to find a new home. And all you do is just swing around the city with pigeons flying around you while a copyrighted song plays. That's the whole fucking mission. And oh, big shock, he's dead when you come back. Ooh, how sad. There's another side quest where you help some blind woman because apparently there's a monster in her yard. It turns out it's one of these robotic panther enemies, and Genki reprograms it to be a dog, a heckin' pupperino, and you train it by shooting webs at shit in the environment. And of course, you give the robot dog to the lady, which has a fucking rainbow painted on it for some fucking reason. This whole game's like that. That's just the tip of the iceberg for that shit. Oh, but it gets worse. It gets much, much worse. There's another mission where you go to Miles' private school and help some Zoomer mutt, who I couldn't even tell was a woman until I looked closely, take pictures around the school, including of their fucking esports club. And then, the quest all of you were waiting for me to talk about, where you help a gay kid ask this dude out to homecoming. Spider-Man is wasting his fucking time helping some gay kid ask out another gay kid. Are you fucking kidding me? What the hell, man? It's not like this is fun. No, you just jump around some rooftops and shoot some webs at some shit, and the game forces you to watch. I literally tried to leave, and the game forced me to web back onto the lamppost over and over again. This is what I'm talking about. This is how you know it's propaganda. They're shoving it down your fucking throat. And no, it being an optional side quest is not an excuse, especially since you had no way of knowing what you would see what this quest contained unless you read it on the internet. It's just a random side quest called Homecoming. But arguably, that's not even the worst side quest in this game. Oh no, there's one even worse. There's a side quest where you play as Miles' deaf girlfriend walking around spraying graffiti on walls. But what's actually hilarious about this mission, well, two things. First of all, you can actually turn on audio for this deaf girl that's being read by a real deaf person, which is very unintentionally hilarious, and I made the most lowbrow humor jokes imaginable here.
Black history and black futurism. The girl pink reflect better in person at Coney.
My futurism. I want my futurism. Wakanda forever. But in Insomniac's Infinite Wisdom, because they couldn't have this character talk to herself, at least out loud, because she's deaf, and this is a modern video game, so the protagonist has to comment on what's going on every 5 minutes, or the fucking soulless golem zoomers playing the game would get bored and turn it off, I guess. Instead of making her just think, emojis pop up on the screen. Deaf people apparently can't think. They don't have words in their head. They can read, but they think in emotes. It's so woke, it circles back around to being like racist, sexist, ableist, whatever, you know. There's another quest where some of the school members decide to throw a big prank, and they kidnap the school mascot, which might be a setup for an okay quest. In reality, you're just solving brain-dead puzzles the entire time, light reflection puzzles that wouldn't be out of place in a shovelware PS2 game. But of course, about halfway through, they have to virtue signal to you and throw in a mural saying how great BIPOC artists are, and we all need to stick together. Because, you know, women think all minorities are the same, apparently. And you might wonder why I'm singling out women. Well, the lead writer of this game was a woman. And we'll get into that a little bit more later because it's kind of important, actually, believe it or not, to the plot of this game, or at least one major mission in particular becomes pretty obvious. And not long afterward, you go to some African art section of the city, and there's a whole other side quest line about retrieving stolen instruments from this black art museum. My god, this game is full of shit like this, dude. This is actually part of the main story, but you meet a scientist chick who has the non-binary flag and the monkeypox flag on her desk. There's a pawn shop with the Ukraine flag on the inside, which this is fucking comic books. This is exactly why I made those two Escapism is Dead videos, because modern developers will not let you escape reality. You must support the current thing. And this is a more minor complaint, all things considered, but this Danica podcast with this purple hair feminist chick is so cringy and unbelievable. It's like the writers fundamentally don't understand what makes podcasts like Joe Rogan popular, and so they have this harmless, sterilized, likely self-insert character who gives the most safe, politically correct opinions on shit that's going on. I mean, J. Jonah Jameson's podcast would be 10 times more popular in reality, even if you don't agree with what he's saying, which a lot of the times what he's saying is absolutely correct.
Inflation through the roof, feckless government officials, and a country on the brink of a collapse not seen since the fall of the Roman Empire.
He just sounds way more interesting. He's actually giving a real opinion. He's enthusiastic. Danica is a face for radio, and she's boring as shit. There's no way anyone would ever listen to her. Before we move on, I want to talk about bugs real quick. This might just be the buggiest high-budget Sony release that has come out in the past 10 years. Now, I can make excuses for a lot of minor bugs that don't really bother me that much, but there are a few here that are inexcusable. The first of which being that this game hard crashed my PS5. It actually overheated, froze, and then shut down the entire thing. It then proceeded to crash 2 more times over the course of the story, though luckily not quite as bad. I also had a weird bug where the enemy AI would just glitch out and stand around and not even attack me at multiple times. There was also this weird bug where I was supposed to solve this laser puzzle by pulling down a bunch of chains to block the lasers, but if you pull down 2 of them, it creates 2 holes in the floor, so I thought, oh, maybe I can just jump in the holes? Yeah, whatever, just go through the hole. Wait, what? What? I thought... Wait a minute, what? So that one was more funny than it was annoying, but I thought it was worth pointing out. And when Miles gets his final power in the story, the game just straight up soft locked. I couldn't press any button, but luckily a quick load checkpoint fixed it. But you'd think that one would have been pretty easy to catch, so I'd have to guess it was broken by the day 1 patch. And I know this isn't technically a bug, but this game has a really bad camera in certain boss fights. During the first Kraven fight, it would zoom in on his face, and I couldn't even see my fucking character model, which makes it a little bit hard to dodge attacks when you can't see the spider sense over your head. And there were a whole bunch of minor bugs that are not really worth going into, and there were some performance issues, but for the most part, I think the game ran fine. But it is definitely worth noting that this game was a little buggy. It's got much bigger issues, but I thought it was worth bringing up. Okay, I think I've stalled enough. Let's finally talk about the main story and how Insomniac's writers, or at least the lead one, absolutely hates Peter Parker. Now, this story was a bit of a convoluted mess, so much so that just 2 days after finishing it, which is the time I'm recording this, I basically already forgotten 80% of it, and I had to go back through my footage just to create this synopsis, which is really not a sign of a good story, and I promise you I actually tried to pay attention this time, unlike with God of War Ragnarok, where I was looking at chat for probably half the game, because once again, that game was boring as fuck. So the story begins with Sandman attacking the city. Why has he attacked the city? I guess his brain is scrambled. That's pretty much as far as it goes. It's explained later that he was being chased by Kraven, but Sandman, a guy who's made of fucking sand, is afraid of some random Russian hunter guy who has a magic potion that makes him somewhat stronger than a normal person. Now, of course, because we needed a new villain faction in this game, Kraven also has 1,000 fucking goons working for him. I mean, seriously, why does he have so many badass hunters that are full of women and people of color? I mean, this is the most diverse group of villains I've ever seen in any video game. I guess on the bright side, you get to beat the shit out of women. Spider-Man hates women so much that he'll break every bone in their bodies. Spider-Man beats up women because he can. Video games are so woke that beating women is no joke. But whatever, that's, I guess, a minor complaint in the grand scheme of things, because so many other games are doing it now. So after you defeat Sandman with Miles' bullshit Mary Sue electric powers, which are good against everything in this game, seriously, Spider-Man comes across some gun goons who are the least diverse enemy group in the game. They are not only mostly white, but they are pretty much all men, and they're jacked, which just made me like them more and want to be part of their club. But we get a little piece of subtle propaganda in there.
I think I'm gonna start a petition. Replace all the gun clubs with something better.
You're right. Revoke the Second Amendment, Spider-Man. I agree. Now, I know people are going to debate this point whether or not it's actually woke, but honestly, I don't care. There's much bigger fish to fry here. At the end of this mission, we end up rescuing J. Jonah Jameson, and he is one of the very few based characters in this game, though obviously unintentionally, as he's just meant to be a right-wing caricature, which is actually hilarious because he's almost always correct.
That Mac Gargan, the Scorpion, has been found dead. His stinger removed like a trophy. One can only assume this was at the hands of the Hunters. Are they doing what the ineffectual Spider-Man won't and removing these dangers permanently?
And shortly after this, we get to meet Miles' friends, Fat Asian Kid Genki, and his deaf girlfriend. This is just fucking cringe, man. I got nothing to say about it, really. This is also where the pacing of the game starts to drop off of a cliff. I know you're probably familiar with this already, as it's a Sony game, but I think specifically Spider-Man 2 is especially bad about this, because even though in terms of the actual number of hours of cutscenes are not nearly as much as God of War Ragnarok, there's so many things that destroy the pacing, whether it's the walking simulator sections, which we'll get to soon, or the horrible mini games and puzzles like I mentioned earlier. There's so many moments in this game where you're not just playing as Spider-Man, aka swinging through the city and beating up bad guys, which is the reason why anybody would want to play a fucking Spider-Man game, and exactly why the original Spider-Man 2 is better than this game. The main storyline of this game is somewhere between 12 and 15 hours, depending on what you consider part of the story, which is more than twice as long as the entirety of the original Spider-Man 2 on PS2, but if you cut out all of the fluff, and I mean basically anything that isn't playing as Peter or Miles and swinging around the city or beating up bad guys, this story would also only be about 6 hours long. That's how much padding is in this. It is absolutely insane and inexcusable. Okay, enough stalling, back to the story. So soon afterward, Peter goes back home, and we finally get to see the new Mary Jane, and oh my god, she's hideous!
What's wrong?
Your face! Mary Jane, more like manly jaw. She looks old enough to be Peter's mom, and with a giant fucking man jaw. That is a man, dude. Look at that body. Wide shoulders, no hips, flat ass. That is a man. And the worst thing is, we know she's a face scan model. We also know what her face used to look like in the old game. And this is what her model actually looks like, okay? Now here's the big twist. This is what the lead writer for this game looks like. Oh yeah, that's not a coincidence. Mary Jane is 100% a self-insert in this game, and that becomes very obvious near the end, but we'll get to that later. And now in a fucking superhero game, we spend the next 5 minutes cleaning up a house. And we get a flashback to when Peter was a teenager and he punched a hole in his wall and Aunt May helped him. Don't care, Aunt May had it coming. In fact, I hope they bring her back and kill her a second time in the next game. Now the game decides to waste the next 30 minutes building up Peter and Harry Osborn's friendship. As we saw in the beginning, they're not even pretending to make it a twist that he's Venom in this game. They pretty much gave it away. So the Venom symbiote is helping him fight off his cancer, so now he's completely fine to do physical activities. There's a walking simulator mission where you ride bikes. Are we gonna really have a bike riding mission? Just make it a cutscene, please. No, dude, don't do it. Don't make me ride my bike in a straight line. It better be a cutscene. Fuck you! Fuck you! And then you have a flashback back to when they were both in high school, and it's incredibly boring and a colossal waste of time. And I might as well bring this up now, but this game has some god-awful dialogue. I mean, ripped straight from Reddit.
Paparazzi's bad enough. But paparazzi with guns?
Oh my god, not paparazzi with guns!
Epic. An impromptu shot of Ponage in action. I'm not a gamer.
No takers. Just me. Okay, well, you know, you come to me for the real, so I'm just trying to deliver.
I'm like a B real estate agent. A B-real estate agent.
Okay. You sound...
I'm peachy. Just peachy. I'm very Reddit chungus right now.
Hey, he isn't at the gardens either. But I found his inhaler and was able to science my way into creating a trail.
I was able to science my way.
Not losing him again.
Could you not, please? I'd like to keep my fight parties.
Could you not?
The spider could not satisfy me like you.
How many gay jokes are in this fucking game?
Shall be your first.
I shall be your first. Oh my. Oh, okay. They're doing it on purpose now. So in our next mission are 2 Spider-Men, and yes, they call each other Spider-Man. Gee, I'm sure that wouldn't be confusing at all to the public, especially when one sounds black and is clearly wearing a different costume. Are guarding a ship carrying the Scorpion and some other prisoners from the raft, as Kraven shows up to break them out for his great hunt. As it comes up later in the plot, Kraven is dying of cancer, even his magic potions can't save him, so he wants to fight the ultimate foe who can finally give him an honorable death. And as you can imagine, this makes him one of the only other based characters in this game. At least he has a pretty understandable motivation. His design is straight ripped from the comics, it looks great. Kraven was certainly one of the only good characters in this game, even if I don't really like the idea of him having 1,000 minions. I mean, where's the sport in hunting this ultimate prey if you have an entire army capturing them for you to fight them in single combat? Isn't part of hunting tracking them down yourself? But whatever, the 2 Spider-Men fail, and there's this whole subplot with Miles trying to resist killing Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative from the first game, because he killed his father, Jefferson Davis, which, yes, everyone has pointed out the funny irony of him being named that. That was kind of the point, yes. And you would think with Miles Morales being Peter Parker's student, protege, apprentice, whatever you want to call it, that maybe Peter would help him forgive Martin Lee, or maybe at least resist the urge to kill him. Nope. Miles does this all on his own. In fact, Miles takes care of all of his problems on his own, but not just his, but also Peter's problems. And people say he's not meant to be a replacement. Well, this game basically straight up tells you that he should replace Spider-Man. So you're just fucking lying to yourself, and it's an embarrassing lie. Now, I hope you enjoyed that mission, because the next one is another walking simulator one. Hooray! At the Emily May Foundation, where they shove another environmentalist message into your head. By no exaggeration, this was 20 straight minutes of slowly walking around and listening to all of these really cool inventions that are gonna save the world. It is some of the most boring shit I've ever done in a video game, man. It is straight up awful, and there's only so many times I can say that, but I didn't care about any of it. The end result is Spider-Man gets a job there. Wow, hooray. Not too long after this moment, Scorpion gets killed by Kraven, which was a legitimately kind of enjoyable moment. Though something I've noticed that this game series has in common with the MCU is they have no problem with killing off villains. Apparently, Shocker, Electro, and Vulture all get killed off screen in this game. So by the time this game is over, half of Spider-Man's rogues gallery are either dead or reformed, because yes, there's multiple reformed villains too in this. I know some people are going to disagree with me on this, but I really think it's a waste of potential to just kill off almost every villain after their first appearance, especially since even though Spider-Man has one of the greatest groups of villains of any Marvel character, it's still only so deep. I don't think Green Goblin's going to be enough to carry the third game, but I guess that's a problem for 5 years down the line at this rate. So the next mission, we finally get to see the return of Black Cat, and guess what? Peter doesn't even get to interact with her. No, this is a Miles Morales mission for some reason, and they tease that Doctor Strange is going to show up, but no, it's just Black Cat stealing a teleporting scroll, and you'll never guess why. Apparently now she's a lesbian, and she uses the scroll to teleport to Paris so she can get with her girlfriend. Are you fucking joking? And what adds insult to injury is Black Cat is one of the only vaguely attractive women in this entire game. There is no other explanation for this except that the writers hate Peter Parker and they hate Peter Parker's fans. All the self-insert nerd people who Spider-Man was literally made for. That's why he's one of the most popular superhero characters ever since his creation, is because he is the perfect self-insert for the nerds who are reading comic books. And so Peter Parker's life is shit, man. So many bad things happen to him. It is a running trope across all of his comic book series. And so what did they do? They gave him a supermodel girlfriend so that he has one thing in his life, one good thing to keep him going so he doesn't just blow his fucking brains out. And what do they do in the games? They take that away from him by making her a fucking 50-year-old man-jawed And although Black Cat is still somewhat attractive, in the comics she was a fucking bombshell, dude. Easily one of the most attractive characters. Just like, you know, Catwoman, who she's blatantly a ripoff of. And while the Arkham games came out before the wokeness explosion in every development studio, just compare what Catwoman looked like in Arkham City or Arkham Knight to this. I mean, shit, in the 90s cartoon, which was for children, they made sure to make Black Cat hot as fuck.
You were terrific back there, and I'd be proud to have you fight by my side. Really care about you. Partners?
That. And maybe more.
And so, you know what? This isn't just a slight against Peter Parker. This is a slight against me, specifically. Fuck you, Insomniac. And fuck anybody who praises, encourages, or even is just okay with ugly art. Because that's exactly what this game is. It's disgusting, demoralizing propaganda trash. And the little cherry on top was an especially bad bit of dialogue that I had to hear 4 times because I kept dying during this part.
Think they're here for the sea lion exhibit?
Oh, I want to see that. Did you know sea lions can swim up to 25 miles per hour?
I wanna see the sea lion. Did you know that sea lion?
Are you fucking joking? I seriously have to ask you if you're one of my black viewers, which, believe it or not, is 12% of my stream audience at the very least. Do you actually think Miles Morales is cool? And I mean Insomniac's version. I think the Spider-Verse one is completely fine. But Insomniac's Miles Morales is fucking Urkel, and you can't change my mind. They tried to make him just Peter Parker, but with black skin, but he's actually worse than that. He's a fucking whiny nerd bitch. Now this is about the time where the story starts to just become pure padding. We get a mission at an amusement park where we get to see that Mysterio and Tombstone are now good guys. Now, do we get any real explanation for how this happened? Of course not. No, it would actually be cool to see how these villains redeem themselves. They would actually have to earn it. But no, not one villain that gets redeemed earns it in this game. The third one being Mr. Negative, which was pretty fucking obvious. Anyone could have guessed that. And after Miles goes into this weird VR universe that Mysterio came up with and fights some guys, then it just becomes a walking simulator mission as Peter, where you get to do a bunch of carnival mini games that are pretty half-assed, and some of them are literally just watching someone enjoy a ride. As someone who's actually been to multiple theme parks throughout his life, including one of the greatest roller coaster parks in the world, Cedar Point, you should actually go and do these things instead of trying to live vicariously through a video game. Trust me, it's worth it. So anyway, Kraven's goons show up, they kidnap Tombstone, and finally, after a lot of unnecessary build-up, Harry uses the Venom symbiote to help save the day. And I actually kind of like this part of the story, even if, again, it does feel like padding. Harry's trying to be a superhero too, but he can't really control the Venom symbiote all that well. And as a nice throwback to the comics, the next time they team up, he's wearing a costume very reminiscent of the Agent Venom costume, which is when Flash Thompson got the Venom symbiote. Yes, that really happened. So after saving Tombstone in the next mission, we kind of get to see just how ridiculous it is that he's a good guy now. I mean, he literally filed his teeth down into basically shark teeth. He's a giant fucking thug, and we're supposed to accept that, I don't know, he just had a change of heart off screen. And then we get to see a little bit of a tease that the Venom symbiote wants to be attached to Peter, not Harry. Could that possibly be foreshadowing? After some more padding with Miles that isn't even worth mentioning, we get one of the worst missions in the game. Insomniac heard everyone's complaints about the Mary Jane missions in the first game, and instead of addressing criticism, like many modern egotistical developers, they decided to double down. Now the Mary Jane missions have turned into glorified The Last of Us missions. I mean, seriously, and Sony games have so little confidence in the average player's abilities that the tutorial extends not just beyond some simple prompts. No, the very first enemy you sneak up to can't kill you. Yeah, how's it going? Kill her. Kill her. What the fuck? No. And even when you get to the actual gameplay part where you can die, these enemies are so deaf and brain dead, you can straight up sprint up to them and stealth kill them. In fact, you can do it to 2 enemies in a row if you're fast enough.
Checking it out.
They're so dumb, as soon as Mary Jane takes cover and goes around a corner, they lose sight of her and are all confused and don't keep tracking your location. All of this on top of the fact that a single taser to the neck knocks them out, when normally it takes like 8 punches to knock out a basic enemy as Spider-Man, who has super strength. Now, this is the part where some nerd says, actually, he holds back against normal humans, otherwise he would kill them. Yeah, but he holds back so much that it takes 8 punches versus 1 taser? Why doesn't he just have electric fists at this point? In fact, Miles Morales could just electrically charge his punches to knock out people instantly. This gameplay is so unbelievably bad, dude. It is truly an embarrassment. And when we finally make it through this segment, the whole point of this mission was to rescue Dr. Connors, aka the Lizard. But of course, Kraven shows up right before she can rescue him, and actually, we get a pretty cool moment where the girl boss finally gets defeated. And briefly, we get to play as Spider-Man again, only for them to take away control in just 5 minutes by having Peter get stabbed by Kraven. We don't even get a boss battle here, no. Insomniac thought it would be more interesting for him to get stabbed during a cutscene, and then we get this major fake out as if Peter Parker's gonna fucking die halfway through the story in a Spider-Man game. and to the shock of absolutely no one, the Venom symbiote attaches to Peter and he gets the black suit. Now, you would think there would be a lot of tension right here because now Harry is going to start dying from his cancer again. Which, honestly, if you think about it, doesn't really make sense. You would think the Venom symbiote would just kill all of the cancer cells in his body and then he would be fine, but I guess that wouldn't be dramatically interesting. And I'm fine with the route they chose. What I do have an issue with is that it takes far too long for Harry to start turning evil. Instead, we get a very, very half-assed Bully Maguire sequence. Because the writers are giant cowards, most of the time Spider-Man isn't even an asshole, and it doesn't help that Yuri Lowenthal is a very bad one-note voice actor who has only managed to have such a prolific career despite his lack of any vocal range for purely nepotistic reasons, and no, I'm not gonna elaborate on that, you'll just have to look it up. But voice acting aside, Peter's steady decline into being a total chud was very sloppily handled, to the point where he goes from being relatively normal but slightly more confident into a complete sociopath and then a monster over the course of like one mission. It actually felt like multiple missions were cut from this game's story because the change happened so suddenly. So next up we have a spy infiltration mission, as Peter discovers the location of where Kraven's goons are hanging out, having a party, and we get to see yet another huge woke moment. And everyone just thinks this is okay, this is fine. This totally means nothing. Your lying eyes, your pattern recognition, that's just schizo shit. I was seriously disgusted when I saw this, and it doesn't help that most of this mission is yet another walking simulator mission. You get into a couple fights at the end, and it almost seemed like we were going to have a reenactment of the famous 90s Shocker scene that I'm sure we all remember.
Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
But no, the actual Kraven fight is a lot more lame than that. The whole point is Spider-Man learns that the Venom symbiote is weak to sonic frequencies, but weirdly enough, the symbiote's not weak to fire in this game, at least not directly. There's even a part where Venom later on walks straight through fire and doesn't get hurt. That seems like kind of an unnecessary change from the comics, but I guess it doesn't really matter that much. So now we're up to 2 moments where we could have had a boss fight with Kraven, but didn't, and I want to remind you that we're over 5 hours into the game's story, and the only boss was at the very beginning. If I didn't make it clear enough already, the pacing in this game is completely off, where it's not just really slow, but after having to watch all of these cutscenes or holding forward in the walking simulator sequences or solving these brain-dead minigames, you're then thrown a really long, high-octane action sequence where the game expects you to suddenly be on top of your game. Let's just say that didn't mix well with my ADHD brain. It was starting to piss me off by this point. Next mission, Peter returns to the Emily May Foundation to team up with Harry to create a serum to return the lizard back to his human form. But since Kraven is now trying to hunt Peter, the hunters attack and destroy the Foundation. And this is where it's implied that Harry starts turning down the path of evil. And now we finally get to the E3 demo mission, and you've already seen all this already. You know exactly what happens even if you didn't play the game. So it's not really worth covering. You chase down the lizard, it's a huge cinematic sequence where you're barely even touching the controller. You know it's a good game when you can play it with one hand. Finally, next mission we catch up with the lizard and get a real boss fight. And my only real complaint with this is something I didn't mention back in the gameplay section, but every single boss fight has an insane amount of dialogue during it. And look, I'm not arguing this on the basis of realism. I couldn't care less about that aspect, to be honest. What I do care about is most of the dialogue is shit, or just completely unnecessary. Once again, it feels like this is there to hold Zoomer's attention, but I feel like it is absolutely misplaced here. If you're fighting a boss that requires you to pay attention to what the enemy is doing so you can react accordingly, the talking is just a distraction. People can say I have a skill issue with this game. That's completely fine by me. But I am not lying to you when I tell you that the talking unironically distracted me and made me worse at the game. And halfway through the fight, it turns into a chase sequence across New York, which actually was a kind of fun part, admittedly. But Kraven, I guess as an homage to King Kong, manages to snipe the lizard off a building with a crossbow, even though just seconds ago we saw cops. Yes, the cops apparently exist in this game despite their extremely reduced presence. Yeah, that's something you'll probably notice. As a response to a common game journalist complaint about Spider-Man helping the police. I know, a fucking superhero helps the police. What a crazy idea, right? Insomniac decide to remove the police from all but just maybe 2 or 3 missions in the entire game, and I don't think Spider-Man even ever directly interacts with them. But anyway, to get back to my point, we see the police shoot at Kraven with assault rifles, and it does nothing, yet one shot from a fucking crossbow is enough to take Lizard off the building, which ultimately doesn't matter because there's still another phase of the boss battle. And Peter injects him with the cure and rescues him from drowning. And now we get one of the big plot twists of the story, that the Venom symbiote is in fact an alien, which everyone who's read any comic or seen the cartoon knows that he's an alien. The only reason this is even a plot twist is because it seemed like a fake out that they were going to do the Ultimate Universe version of the story where he was made in a lab. So I'm kind of glad they actually stuck to the comics on this one. And Dr. Connors warns Peter that the Venom symbiote corrupts your mind. And now, of course, since we've been told this in the story, all of a sudden Peter's transformation into a monster skyrockets from this point forward because we gotta rush this shit along. We got 2 main characters, there's no time to develop one complete plot line. And ironically, even though a lot of people kind of shit talk that you play Miles Morales for about half this game, Miles Morales has almost nothing to do with any of this. His subplot with Mr. Negative is the only connection to the main plot. We really could have used more development with Chud Mode Peter, as I'm gonna call him, because he doesn't really act like Bully Maguire. He just acts kind of like a crazy animal psycho guy, which I don't know, is kind of just more boring. I would like it if it was a more subtle descent and Peter just realized that the suit was making him evil, not it being so blatantly obvious to the audience and in your face. And I actually want to suggest a secondary option if you don't want a more mature, serious route. You could just do what the 90s cartoon did. Believe it or not, in the original comics, the black suit didn't actually corrupt Peter's mind. That was an idea the cartoon came up with first, and let me give you a little bit of a sample of what that sounded like.
It's like this. I'm through with not getting what I want. That's funny. I give up too. I give up trying to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
And I actually think this could have made for an interesting opportunity in the game as well. Maybe throw one of Peter's C-list villains at him and he just fucking brutalizes him, or even better, actually kills him. That would have set up a great character development moment where he realizes what the suit has done to him and then he has to tear it off himself. Now, of course, that's not the story this game is going for. And speaking of all of this, this is when we get to the next Mary Jane mission. If you've been sticking to the main story, it hasn't even been 2 hours since the last one. We have to play as Mary Jane again. And I had enough of this shit, so I just speed ran that. And this is when I really pushed the limits of how bad the stealth system was. And the setup for this is just as cringe as the mission itself. Basically, Peter finally needs to sleep after, saving the world a million times. And while he's sleeping, Venom takes over his body. Meanwhile, MJ has to defend the house and single-handedly tases like 20 hunters by herself. And if this mission wasn't bad enough, it ends with Mary Jane cornering Peter in a tunnel, and she sees that he's become a monster, and so there's a little bit of a chase scene that is almost impossible to fail, by the way, and I had to let go of the controller for several seconds for Peter to catch up, and we get a very lame game over sequence. Oh, thank God. Jesus Christ, that took way too long. Oh, and the cherry on top? Failing the QuickTime events here does nothing. Yes, this is yet another Sony game where the QuickTime events are meaningless. And so, what are the results of this mission? Well, Mary Jane writes a scathing article about Spider-Man for J. Jonah Jameson. Okay, is that really supposed to be a source of conflict between these two? You could easily just reason it away as MJ trying to keep her job, but because Peter is in Chud mode now, he's obviously pissed about it. And luckily, right after this, we get the only legitimately good dramatic scene in the entire game.
I need that suit back.
You can't have it.
Pete.
Venom's my waifu.
What do you remember about last night?
I just remember feeling tired.
Pete. You're not yourself. That suit is changing you.
Disgusting. Stop zooming in on her. She's so gross.
Yeah, it's pretty great, isn't it?
Why don't you pop some more pills and say what you're really feeling?
Hey, don't.
I'm busting my ass out there trying to save you, and this is what I get?
I said don't.
I saw your story.
I tried to tell you about that.
Yeah, but you didn't, did you?
I can't lose this job.
Your job is to write the truth.
I did.
The truth is, I'm the hero here, not you.
Yeah. Everything he's saying is correct, though. Am I supposed to think he's a bad guy? He's actually being objectively correct. I have no genuine critiques here. If even half of the scenes in the game were like this, I wouldn't complain about all of the cutscenes and the walking simulator sequences. This is why I wanted more of Peter with the black suit, because we get to see one of our favorite heroes, our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, who genuinely tries to be as good a person as possible, slowly be corrupted and become more arrogant. It's just inherently pretty interesting. Unfortunately, this is pretty much all we get, outside of him acting like a weird sociopathic rage monster in just a second after this. Not to mention, that little scene right there is a massive source of drama. Well, that and the fact that he was neglecting his butt buddy Miles. Yes, that is a real plot point, that he wasn't answering Miles' calls, and so now he's upset at him. And so the writers force Peter to apologize for the rest of the game, despite the fact it's not his fucking fault that Venom was influencing his mind. Get ready for this point to come back up later. And this next mission was actually pretty solid as well. Basically, Miles ends up tracking down Mr. Negative. He's been captured by Kraven. They have a 1v1 boss battle where Miles decides, obviously, not to kill him, which I think is definitely the wrong move. It's way too boring. It's yet another thing that makes Miles way too similar to Peter, but without any of the character flaws. So anyway, instead of killing Mr. Negative, he helps him escape, and so off-screen, Miles fights Kraven 1v1, and spoilers, he loses. Remember that for later. So of course, Peter shows up, he goes ballistic, and again, this just shows the writers are completely toothless, because despite beating the absolute shit out of all these goons, he never actually kills anybody. So anyway, you fight your way there, you fight Kraven in a 1v1 boss battle that's actually admittedly pretty good, even if I was pissed off at the time on the stream. The second phase of the fight is one of the only boss fights in the game with a legitimate gimmick, that being the symbiote's weakness to sonic frequencies, so you have to like web up this bell, right? But just as Spider-Man might kill Kraven, now notice how I say might, because he hasn't even knocked Kraven unconscious. That's an important plot point here. He's still choking him out as Miles shows up and attacks Peter to stop him from killing Kraven. Now here we have the first major moment of the story that legitimately pissed me off. Despite losing to Kraven in a 1v1 fight, Miles is able to defeat Peter with the symbiote suit on. And I just know there's going to be people making excuses for this, saying that, well, Miles' bioelectricity abilities are more effective on the symbiote, and he also could ring the bell in the arena. Well, first of all, it's fucking stupid that his electricity is good against everything in this game. Yeah, not a single enemy resists his powers in any way. In fact, most of the time it's the opposite. And while the bell argument is fine, I still don't think it should have been enough. Miles already feels like a Gary Stu in a bunch of moments throughout this game, but this is truly the moment that solidified his place as the replacement for Peter Parker, because not only does the student surpass the master, but a more powerful version of his master at that. And again, it robs Peter Parker of a great character development moment he could have had. It is embarrassing when the 90s cartoon with its over-the-top voice acting handled this better than the $100 million AAA video game. So with the help of Miles, Peter rips the suit off and they capture it, and they have a conversation on a nearby rooftop, which is the beginning of Peter's various groveling, apologizing moments that you're gonna get for the rest of the story. None of this was his fault. Venom was manipulating his mind. Peter didn't even choose to put the fucking suit on. Venom latched to him to save him from dying. So remind me how the fuck any of this behavior, any of his actions were his fault when he was being mind controlled. So anyway, Peter decides that they need to destroy Venom because he's simply too dangerous. You can't afford to give him back to Harry because Norman is working on a different cure, which, of course, as you could probably guess, is the Goblin Serum. So Peter makes his way back to Connor's lab alone, which is kind of stupid. And Harry is there waiting for him, and the Venom symbiote just kind of breaks out of containment after a dramatic moment between the two of them. And in yet another contrived moment, Venom is born, and he is way more powerful than he was being attached to Peter, which is not explained in any way, but I will let it slide because it's a rule of cool moment. And this Venom is more overpowered than the comic book version, at least in the 90s comics that I read anyway, because he's now like 12 feet tall and basically unkillable from this point forward. You're gonna see a lot over the course of this game. They wanted Venom to be a planet-wide threat, which is kind of a problem because Spider-Man is a street-level hero, and it's already been confirmed that the Avengers and Doctor Strange exist in this universe, so this is a little too much to ask for someone in Spider-Man's power level. But I'll admit this is actually just a minor complaint, because for me personally, I thought everything that happens from this point forward was actually pretty cool, even if a lot of it was poorly written in certain ways. And Venom is one of my favorite anti-heroes slash villains, though don't expect him to come back as an anti-hero. He is clearly fucking evil in this version. I'm guessing this can be explained away by the fact that Harry Osborn is dying and he wanted to save the world through environmentalism, and so this is influencing Venom to have this global plot to turn everyone into symbiotes. Whereas Eddie Brock just hated Peter Parker, and the Venom symbiote acted like a scorned ex-girlfriend in the original comic book version, so there was obviously a lot of potential for redemption there. And I like anti-heroes who kill people like the Punisher, so it kind of sucks that this version is just blatantly evil. But yet again, I have derailed from the plot synopsis. The good news is this is the best mission in the game, because you actually get to play as Venom, but only for this mission. And the gameplay is extremely basic. You're basically just spamming square and hitting circle to block or deflect projectiles. But it actually feels like a superhero game, like Hulk Ultimate Destruction. The only thing it's missing is being able to pick up and throw cars, but it's pretty much got the rest. And you beat the absolute shit out of like 100 of Norman Osborn's goons. Then you beat up a bunch of hunters, and finally Kraven shows up. You get another boss battle, you absolutely wipe the floor with him, and then Venom chops his head off, which is easily the best moment in the entire game. Finally, it felt like there were stakes, there were consequences to actions, and best of all, it was just a really cool and fun moment. It was very simplistic, but it doesn't go on too long, and the boss fight was decent enough, though more brain dead than the rest easily, given how simplistic the gameplay was for that mission. But I will take simple and fun over complex and overly drawn out boring crap, which a lot of the rest of this game is composed of. The only real problem I have with this entire sequence is that it just makes the entire Kraven plotline feel kind of pointless. He existed purely to be a jobber to Venom, to make Venom seem like a real threat, the most powerful thing that Spider-Man has faced so far, because we just got to see how badass Kraven was. He easily killed Scorpion. He was able to fight Spider-Man with the symbiote almost to a standstill. He defeated Miles, albeit off-screen. But much later, right at the end of the game, Miles Morales is a match for Venom. He fights Venom in single combat and is able to fend him off, and Peter gets a plot device power that allows him to fight Venom. There's a real reason. Miles does not. So the power levels are fucked in this game. Okay, I just had to rant about that for a second. And now we're finally in the third act, and unfortunately we get yet another hour plus of padding before the end. We definitely should have only gotten maybe 1 or 2 more missions here and then the final fight with Venom, but I guess they had to build up how crazy over the top the stakes are, because now Venom is turning normal people into symbiotes. And so Peter actually uses his smarts for once and recalibrates his Sonic Blast gadget to stun the symbiote, which I guess that makes sense, that's okay, but the game just keeps going. There's a mission where you have to rescue Miles' mom and Genki from a subway. Why the hell is this even a mission? Again, it's just padding. It's like they forgot that Miles has nothing to do with this fucking story, so they just had to insert this here. Now we get to arguably the worst part of the entire game, the Scream boss battle. Mary Jane gets infected with the symbiote, and she turns into Scream, who actually is a symbiote from the comics, and we get the most blatant, transparent, feminist rant I think I've ever heard in a video game. I'm just gonna play some clips from the boss battle, and you could judge for yourself.
Done begging for validation from you, from anyone.
Validation? If this is about your job,
It's about me. Hey! It's not my job in this stupid house.
Typical woman. Me.
don't listen to those voices. They aren't telling the truth. I heard them too. I know how it feels.
Always about you. You can't keep a job. You can't pay the mortgage. Did he do without Spider-Man? Look how it's doing with you.
I can still fix this. I always do. We always do.
I always come second. I live in your shadow where my dreams turn to dust.
Remember your book? You said you want to help people.
Nobody read it.
Yeah, because it was shit. I think most of this game was written by a woman. No, it didn't. Shut the fuck up, Peter. You're such a bad liar, really. Your book helped me, MJ.
Looking for answers, please, because you
What a fucking simp.
can't pay a bill.
Fighter simp.
I don't believe in for a man I despise, so you can be happy.
I was wrong. You don't have to trust me, but please trust yourself.
Let me do what I have to do.
You're right. I've been selfish. I was so wrapped up in my own life. I never thought about yours.
Fuck.
You just want to stay the stronger half. What? You don't feel special anymore?
What? No! You're stronger than me in so many ways.
Watson, where are you with my apple fritters? I'm starving, and
Jonah? Kiss my ass. I quit.
Watson!
You're so cool.
What the actual fuck? If anyone says this is a good story, stop listening to them, please, for love of God. Man, I got nothing more to say here that I didn't already say during the stream. This was painfully bad. Mary Jane is obviously the self-insert of the lead writer for this game, and this rant must be directed toward her ex-boyfriends or some shit, because this is some of the most out-of-touch, narcissistic bullshit I think I've heard in any piece of entertainment. It reads like a parody. And before anybody says that, oh, that's the point because she's got a symbiote on her, so that's not really what she thinks. No, the symbiote is enhancing what she already felt. And that's why Peter is constantly fucking apologizing and acting like a bitch the entire time. Fuck you, Insomniac. It's unbelievable. I've got nothing more to say, really. So eventually, Peter gets attacked by a bunch of symbiotes at the same time, and they're trying to bring his trace venom molecules in his bloodstream or whatever. And so, Miles and Mr. Negative team up to go inside of the negative zone in his brain or something. I don't know how the fuck this works. It happened earlier in the game, and I just skimmed over it because who gives a shit. Basically, you just fly through the Shadow Realm, and you fight a bunch of melee-only enemies who you can infinitely air juggle. Yes, this is that brain dead. At least we get a throwback to the first game with the Sinister Six getting a little cameo in there. And this mission ends with Peter getting the anti-venom powers. If you haven't heard of Anti-Venom, yes, he does come from the comics, and it is Eddie Brock in the comics, who of course doesn't exist in Insomniac's universe because he had too much Chad energy, I guess. And the whole purpose of Anti-Venom is to kill symbiotes. So you know what that means? It means that these new bullet spongy enemies that you've been fighting for the last hour can actually be defeated normally, thank God. But the worst part of this mission comes right at the very end, as despite Peter now having a real reason to contribute, something that makes him stand out from Miles, since Miles is pretty much just him but better, he says this.
Why would the city need me when it has you?
Now all of you can stop coping, seething, and dilating, claiming that Marvel's not trying to replace Peter Parker since he's a straight white male. Insomniac just straight up told you that Miles should replace Peter because he's better in every way, and he's also an oppressed minority, and he's very cultured. And Peter, at the ripe old age of 26, is busted and slow and useless despite just being given a power which would justify his existence in this plot. This is where they decide to put this line. This is the writers saying fuck you to the audience and that they hate Spider-Man. People who hate Spider-Man were put in charge of writing a Spider-Man story. You know, kind of just like comic books over the past, 15 years. But Sony fans are fucking idiots. They'll eat this slop up. They don't care because they hate themselves. They are the soy boy beta male Redditors who hate themselves. Okay, back to the plot. Venom is trying to retrieve this meteorite from Dr. Connor's lab that he landed in from space. Somehow this thing will help him infect everybody with symbiotes. It's not really explained. And we get an almost good scene with Norman Osborn seeing what has become of his son. And Spider-Man shows up right in the nick of time, but of course, it's way too early for a boss fight here. So Venom gets a hold of the other piece of the meteorite, and I'll admit, I don't even remember when he got the first piece. Again, I was trying to pay attention, but this shit was very boring. And we're given an actually interesting ethical dilemma. Dr. Connors tells Peter that he has to kill Harry to stop Venom, whereas Norman Osborn wants him to save his son. Unfortunately, because this is a modern superhero story, Spider-Man doesn't consider killing Harry for even a second, so it's not really a real moral dilemma, but we almost had something interesting there. And as Peter escapes the building, we get to see that New York is already covered in giant tendrils of symbiote slime. And we meet up with Miles again, and he has the ugliest fucking superhero costume I think I've ever seen. And so you would think, now we get to the last mission. Nope. There's another mission where they have to infiltrate the symbiote nest and get this meteorite that's going to help him infect the entire world with symbiotes or whatever. Who cares? But the real issue is that this is another fucking Mary Jane mission. And it becomes a straight-up third-person shooter. If it wasn't obvious enough that they were trying to make a discount Last of Us with the last two Mary Jane missions, it just straight up is a shooter. And it's so brain dead. So fucking unbelievably easy and brain dead. This game's combat system, despite my personal complaints, is good. I don't think it's as good as Arkham Knight, but it's good. This is not fucking good. This is terrible. It feels so half-assed. Mary Jane shouldn't have even fucking been here. She has unbelievable plot armor at this point that she can go into a nest full of symbiotes and defeat all of them and come out unscathed. The amount of secondhand cringe I got from playing this is unbelievable. It's almost funny, but it's not because you have to play it. So now, we finally get to the huge showdown with Venom. And guess what? Your anti-venom debuff that worked on every other version of the symbiote suddenly doesn't work until the second phase of the boss. Why? I don't know, because I guess we had to drag out this boss battle for 4 fucking forms, and 2 out of those 4 forms, you're playing as Miles Morales. Because he's there, he exists, he has to contribute. This is clearly Peter's moment to fight his best friend. That is the dramatic buildup of the story, and they still had to have you play as Miles Morales for the second half of the fight, no less. So Miles gets the final in-game blows against Venom, against Harry Osborn, a character he barely knows, and yet they still force fucking dialogue between the two of them as if he has any emotional investment in what's going on. I don't care what anybody says. This is forced as fuck. He shouldn't even be here. Anyway, after some really over-the-top bullshit, Peter finally purges Venom from Harry's body, and he starts dying from his cancer again. Meanwhile, MJ runs the meteorite through the particle accelerator. Yes, MJ's here too. And they destroy it, which conveniently vaporizes all of the symbiote webbing and all of the minor symbiotes from the city. Yes, it's one of those shitty plot lines where it's like a hive mind that can be killed, so that there's no real consequences to the story. And speaking of lack of consequences, Harry doesn't even die here. As he's about to, Miles defibrillates his heart with his powers, which ultimately doesn't even fucking matter because Harry's still in a coma, unless they're gonna turn him into Green Goblin in the next one, which is sort of an implication, but I hope they subvert their subversion and just have it be Norman Osborn be Green Goblin, because Harry being the villain twice in a row would be kind of shit. But again, it just shows how toothless these writers are. They couldn't even kill Harry Osborn. This would have been the perfect moment to do it. But no, Miles has to be the Black Messiah, and he saves Harry, even though he might as well be functional. He did. And then we get yet another fucking terrible scene where Peter takes a break from being Spider-Man to be Peter Parker. Now, some people have interpreted this as him retiring and Miles taking up the mantle, but you and me both know that Spider-Man 3 would fucking bomb, much like Miles Morales did, if Miles was now permanently Spider-Man. So, of course, Peter's gonna come out of retirement in the next one, but it still is cringe as fuck. And then we get 2 credit scenes, one in the middle of the credits, where Norman meets up with Doc Ock. Obviously, they're going to team up in the next one. And then the end credits scene, where it shows Miles' mom is dating some dorky fat Asian guy, and his daughter is Cindy Moon, aka Silk. So we're now going to have 3 Spider-Men in the next one. Instead of Spider-Gwen, it's going to be Silk. Because it wasn't enough to have a minority Spider-Man, we now also need a woman Spider-Man. In fact, just fucking kill Peter Parker already. I'm tired of this bullshit. This story fucking sucks. So in conclusion, should you buy Spider-Man? Well, you already did or you already didn't. But just in case you were waiting for my review, no, don't buy this woke piece of trash. Do I need to remind you of the gay homecoming dance mission? Do I need to remind you where you play as Miles' deaf girlfriend? Do I need to remind you that this is one giant story to set up Peter Parker's replacement? Even though Miles had almost nothing to do with the overall plot. You could have easily cut him out of this game and just had Peter team up with Mr. Negative, or maybe exploit Venom's weakness to Sonic, or, you know, bring back his comic book weakness to fire. Maybe have Human Torch show up, because he's actually friends with Human Torch in the comics. Literally anything other than playing as other Spider-Man for no fucking reason other than diversity points. And the Spider-Verse movies are surprisingly popular. That's pretty much it. So yeah, is the gameplay good? Yes. but you're not even playing the gameplay that much of this story, dude. I mean, sure, if you're one of those people who likes 100% in games, plenty of the sandbox is just fighting guys, but honestly, I'm tired of that shit. I just want a good fucking story, and not even necessarily a story, but a good campaign, right? But no, the campaign missions in this are some of the worst parts of the game, where you're just swinging around the city, having a good time, fighting some bad guys, kind of like the OG Spider-Man 2. It's actually a decent game, but as soon as you start doing any of these woke side quests, or the extremely terribly written story for the numerous reasons I outlined earlier in the video, then it starts going to shit. It's just terribly paced. I never thought I would say an Insomniac game has terrible pacing, given their track record with Spyro and Ratchet & Clank, which are both vast majority gameplay. Same goes for Sunset Overdrive. But no, this is another legitimate Sony-certified movie game, and it's not even a good movie. It's a mishmash of a bunch of different famous plot lines from the comics, but for no reason, really. I mean, Kraven's Last Hunt doesn't even play into this except just to set up Venom. That's it, and Kraven was the best character. So yes, Insomniac is dead, at least to me. I'm sure this game will make money. It's a Spider-Man game. Of course it will. But clearly, they don't have very many talented developers at their studio anymore. They blundered this game in a lot of different ways. And they clearly care more about pushing their progressive politics than they do about telling a good story. Many such cases. I want to remind you that I used to be a massive fan of Sony. I loved my PS1, my PS2, I even liked my PS3. And the sad thing is, I used to love superheroes too. I grew up on my dad's comic books. I played a bunch of great superhero games growing up, and more recently, I played some great PS2 classics I'd never touched before. Be sure to check out my last superhero games video if you want to hear me talk about some good games. Infamous 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. And that's exactly how a superhero game should be done. Well, Sony's fucking dead to me now. I look forward to putting this on the worst games of 2023. Not because it's objectively as bad as Forspoken, or Gollum, or Immortals of Aveum, but because I despise this game much like I despise Starfield. So that's about it. See you next time, guys. Alright, here we go. Miles Snow, choose life! Not bad, not bad. Okay. That's more fun than I've had in the last several hours playing this game.